The Many Hypocrisies of Bernie Sanders, a fascinating interview with Tim Schmidt, president of the USCCA, and a commentary on little baby Alfie coming up next on The Dr. Duke Show. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Duke, and thank you again for joining us as always. Joined with the impeccably argyle Katie Petrick of the Healthy Republic for the Countdown. Katie, what is on your mind this week that you want to pick this massive brain over?
Well, I have a big book list to go through.
Or at least a big head.
There you go. I have a big book list to go through. You and I both love reading, and we love finding good quality books. And GQ, the editors over at GQ, have done us a solid and came out with a list of books that we shouldn't even bother wasting our time with. They have 21 books that we don't have to read. And the editors at GQ said, we realize that not all the great books have aged well. Some are racist and some are sexist, but most are just really, really boring. So we, in a group of unboring writers, give you permission to strike these books from the canon. First and foremost on that list is the Bible. Yeah, right. So let's just start with the premise here. GQ is going to tell us what books we should and shouldn't read. With all due respect, anybody who reads GQ probably doesn't have the proper IQ to make any such decision, let alone the editors. But what do we expect from a trendy, postmodern, millennial-based rag like GQ? Okay, so the Bible's at the top of their list, right? And let me guess, and you and I have both looked at this list. What strikes me about the list is how superficial it is, right? Don't read the Bible because, give us their answers. What does it say about the Bible? So the Holy Bible is rated very highly by all the people who supposedly live by it, but who in actuality have not read it. Those who have read it know there are some good parts, but overall it is certainly not the finest thing that man has ever produced. It is repetitive, self-contradictory, sententious, foolish, and even times ill-intentioned.
Yeah, without a single example, right? No. And what's abundantly clear from almost all the books on this list is the editors at the GQ haven't read it, right? So people who claim to live by it view it very highly. And that's only about, I mean, if you factor in Islam and Judaism, it's only about 4 billion people. So 4 billion people who claim to live by the Bible rate it very highly. But of course, according to GQ, those people haven't read it. I'll tell you who has read more of the Bible than progressive editors at GQ, pretty much everybody. So, I mean, this is a no-brainer. The moment they put the Quran on this list, because that's a real snoozer, right? Nothing. You want to talk about endless repetitive loops. You want to talk about dry as dust meditations. But of course, the editors at GQ would not do that because I guess they like their buildings intact, I suppose.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's a list of 21 books, and it's actually only 20 books because for some, I don't know what reason, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn actually got put on there twice, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But in this 21-book list, they managed to offend both of us in finding out our pretty much favorite books. And the one that is your favorite is The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like it as much as I like the Bible, I'll tell you that. And I think that the foundations of all Western literature, all the genres that we appreciate as Western, they actually emanate in many ways from the Bible. And as far as the counting thing goes, before we get into this, right, they can't count and they can't read, as all GQ seems to be able to demonstrate here. But yeah, The Lord of the Rings, their argument for The Lord of the Rings is that Tolkien was too interested in creating backstory to actually tell a real story, without recognizing that all that backstory, right, all of that careful crafting of languages, all of that careful detail to geography and theology and philosophy, all of that stuff is what makes the story. And I'll say this, the same reason they don't like the Bible is the same reason they don't like The Lord of the Rings. What does the Bible do? It provides the same cosmic backstory for thousands of years of human history that Tolkien provides for his Middle Earth. And so the fact that they are too shallow and too sensory deprived, too ADD, right, apparently, the editors at GQ to even count correctly, we can dismiss, I think, their perspective. It's kind of like putting Cosmo in charge of deciding the Nobel Prize in Literature. For the last 50 years, for the next 50 years, it will be 50 Shades of Grey. 50 Shades of Grey's grayer, right? That kind of stuff. Take it for what it's worth.
Yeah, in the book that offended me that they put on, and I was impressed that they had even heard of it because it's something with history and it's facts, John Adams by David McCullough. I am arguably John Adams' #1 fan. He is one of the founding fathers who often gets overlooked, and yet they managed to find him and say that David McCullough, and this is the reason you shouldn't read John Adams, is that David McCullough is one of our foremost historians, and his books are written with great care and impressive attention to detail. how dare we do that and actually get the facts out there.
Well, isn't that what they said about the Bible and about Tolkien?
Basically.
Too much care, too much detail, too much craftsmanship, too much backstory. You know, we don't want to be bothered with all those facts when it comes to history. Spoken like a true millennial. And in the spirit of reciprocity, goofy liberal organizations, goofy liberal progressives are always making these lists of why we shouldn't believe or read or study or like any of the things we like as conservatives and Christians. Well, we've gone to the trouble to make our list just as a little give and take here, a little tit for their tat. And our list is actually entitled 5 Overrated Progressive Books That You Don't Even Bother to Read, right? And at number 5, we have listed The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. And socialists love this book because, but it was a failure. But even by socialist terms, it was a failure. It was Upton Sinclair's attempt to push socialism to turn-of-the-century Americans. And as Sinclair himself was forced to admit, he aimed at America's heart, trying to convince people that socialism was the way to go, and only ended up turning their stomachs. The only thing people ever cared about in that book is the meatpacking industry, right? So all he did, and it was good that he did it. He shed light on the meatpacking industry. He made them clean up their act a little bit. But socialism continued to be despised in America, and it is today pretty much anywhere except wherever Obama is now.
Yep, number 4, A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn.
Howard Zinn.
This one, if you want to talk about reading history in a thick book and it being boring and it not being factual at all, read A People's History of the United States.
Howard Zinn's The People's History of the United States, which began the corruption of American history teaching in this country, so idiots like the editors at GQ don't have to worry about facts when it comes to history anymore. Howard Zinn's socialist rewriting of American history. Think of the Upton Sinclair's The Jungle without the redeeming expose of the meat industry. That's what you get with Howard Zinn. Pretty much a view of American history filtered through Marxism. Every lefty I know gets gaga over it. But like the Bible, they can't remember much of anything from it, right? It's the same sort of thing. So we put People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn at number 2. At number 3,
we have Rules for Radicals by Saul
Rules
Alinsky.
for Radicals, and the book that he dedicated to Lucifer, the first great revolutionary, right? So Saul Alinsky and the atheist liberal progressives dedicating their book to the devil himself. I'm pretty sure this would be fairly high on GQ's list, simply for the dedication alone. Rules for Radicals. It is sophomoric community activism. It is a book that, it's like Machiavelli without the subtlety, right? It is an in-your-face explanation of how to trick and steal and rob and lie to people to get them to follow your politics. Highly, highly overrated, and no need to read it unless you're a brain-dead moron who was allegedly born in Hawaii. And number 2, speaking of brain-dead morons who were allegedly born in Hawaii, we've got
Dreams from My Father.
One of those autobiographies that he didn't write, right? Given that Obama could only read other people's words, not write his own when he was a president, he was really good at reading everybody else's speeches. He couldn't even write his own book, theoretically. And when you think about Dreams from My Father, it is a boring It is a boring conglomeration of made-up girlfriends, composite girlfriends, remember that? Pot-smoking, dissing on his white adopted mother and grandmother, right? Throwing them under the bus, mocking them, while praising the absent father, right, who abandoned him and his white wife, right, and left him to be raised by a single mother. That just goes to show you, right, that when it comes to Obama's judgment, he's always siding on the wrong side of history.
It's the audacity.
The audacity of hope. And finally, of course, right, and briefly, the Communist Manifesto. What are your thoughts on the Communist Manifesto?
Absolutely everyone goes gaga for it and yet doesn't know anything about it. So they think this is the most wonderful book. It's like the Bible, but completely not, because it's just what GQ is saying, that, oh, this is the book and no one actually has read it. But everyone has read it, but they don't know what's going on.
It's like the Communist Manifesto is to communism what Mein Kampf is to Nazism, only without the hysterical, psychotic whimsy added to it. Economists have to concede that it's it's utopian economics. It's economics done for non-real world economic problems, right? It's an economic textbook, basically an economic primer that has no practical value as a piece of economics. And whenever people try to force this utopian progressive worldview, this dreamer Garden of Eden version of utopia, when they try to force these economics into real world situations, guess what happens? Everybody gets poorer, everybody gets taxed more and more state control, and greater loss of individual freedom, and on and on and on. It not only is a snoozer, it's bad economics, it's bad philosophy, it's badly written, it strikes out at everything it does, and we have now over 100-year history of its absolutely inability to link that up with anything in the real world economically. So Communist Manifesto comes in at number 1, and there you go. See, we can do it too, ladies and gentlemen. We can point out all kinds of books you shouldn't use and shouldn't bother reading, although we'll give you real reasons for it.
All right, well, now that we've talked about old and outdated things and lists, we're going to move on to another old and outdated thing. Old man Bernie Sanders is back with a guaranteed jobs plan. So Senator Bernie Sanders is announced that he's soon going to unveil a plan to completely solve unemployment in America. National program, what's going to be included? This national program for federal government guarantees every American a lifetime job paying at least $15 an hour. They are going to have family and medical leave. They'll have retirement, health, and vacation benefits. Every citizen, he says, who wants or needs a job would be trained and hired to work on one of the hundreds of new infrastructure, education, caregiving, environmental projects proposed. So all of this, he's saying, this is what my new plan will include. He's still working out the details. Obviously, he has no idea how he's going to pay for it. He doesn't know where the money will come. We don't know how much it's going to cost, but, details.
Yeah, Bernie Sanders, when I hear Bernie Sanders talking about jobs, I ask myself first and foremost, what job has he ever held outside of public official, right? And so Bernie Sanders has this great, when I hear Bernie Sanders, a socialist, right? Somebody who read Howard Zinn's history and reads the Communist Manifesto, that this is a guy who's concerned about jobs. Well, it's interesting, he's taken pretty good care of himself, right? The idea that, can you name one piece of legislation in the 50 years he's been in his post that he's ever accomplished? Can you name one? No. Can you name one piece of legislation? Can you name one major achievement of the Sanders long suckling at the teat of American public life? I can't either. But what we did is, in the spirit of list building, we created 5 fun facts about Bernie Sanders and his qualification to tell anybody what jobs to get. And before we show you that, it's up on the screen now. Before we talk about it, I want to just reemphasize what you said, Katie. So this is a guy who's who's only had one job, right?
Essentially.
And is paid much, much better than $15 an hour. Yes. All right, who's never had to meet a payroll, never had to hire anybody, never had much oversight, never had to pay the kind of business taxes and adjust the way that real business people do. And he's going to tell us what the job plan is. And isn't it interesting that Bernie Sanders is telling us about his great job plan for America when you've got the lowest unemployment in America in decades and decades and decades? We've got 14 states in the news complaining that there are not enough jobs, right? That there's too much employment, in other words. There's too much employment, right? That they don't know what to do with all of this. So, as again, Bernie's timing is impeccable. But throw up our list here of the top 5 Bernie Sanders facts. And let's ask ourselves, and you can start with the first one there, Katie, is this the guy you want running a jobs program in America?
Yeah, well, so he's a lifetime politician, and essentially, if you can find this, Google it, you can find his resume. It's a sad-looking resume. It's a very short resume. He was a mayor for about a decade in the 80s. He spent time as being the mayor of Burlington in Vermont, and he actually is proud of being the only socialist mayor of the United States. So he has on his resume, which, again, is pretty piddly, he does say, I will defend him, that he has had other jobs, but it's a freelance writer, a youth counselor, and a carpenter. Mm-hmm. But basically, he's been a lifetime politician.
It's like a 1960s folk song, right? If I had a hammer, I'd be Bernie the carpenter, right?
That's exactly it.
This is just hysterical. Guy who spent his whole life and career working for government, with all of the perks and all of the advantages that come with that, and without ever having to achieve any success. I mean, how do you measure the success? The left-wing lunatics of Vermont, which is about the size of a pencil, they keep voting him in, which is fantastic for him. Good for you, Bernie. And yet, all that time spent in government, and what do we have to show for it? That's
not a whole lot.
That's exactly the kind of policies that Bernie Sanders provides for us. Number 4, Bernie Sanders refuses to comment on new reports out that Russia aided his 2016 campaign, right? That there are reports and apparently evidence that Bernie Sanders' campaign, the Russians tried to boost it at the expense of Hillary. And Bernie, with busy building tables in the garage, I guess, too busy building tables to be able to comment on this when his name is finally in the news again, right? Pretty quiet about all this.
Basically. Number 3, ongoing investigation of his wife for bank fraud.
Oh, yeah. So Bernie is married to a woman who is a president of a college.
Yes.
And as president of that college, engaged in some very, very, very shady bank fraud.
Yeah, basically back in 2010, the university was able to get a land deal. She was able to clinch it as being president of Burlington College. And then in 2011, she resigned amid allegations that she purposely inflated and made up the amount of money that donors have pledged to the school. and able to get that loan for the land.
So Bernie is the preeminent socialist of our day, right? He is the kindest, wisest, most generous. He's kind of like the Yoda of American socialism, with a slightly worse comb over. And the thing about this that gets me is that you've got a wife who's who's not just engaging in potential bank fraud, but who is up to her earlobes in banking, right? Who is manipulating money and getting investments and dealing with a huge enterprise like a university with all of its excess and its expense. And we don't seem to see the contradiction here, right? Well, Bernie can be a socialist. His wife clearly isn't. Yet that doesn't in any way, shape, or form pick apart his bona fides. I'm not so sure about that.
Exactly. Well, keeping with him and his wife, they honeymooned. Because there's no better way to honeymoon, no better place on earth to honeymoon than in the USSR.
Yeah, the second of our fun facts about Bernie Sanders is he actually, when he got married, while the Soviet Union was still the Soviet Union, the evil empire, right on the eve, within a few short years, I believe, of the Soviet Union invading Afghanistan, we have Bernie Sanders over there for a honeymoon in the Soviet Union. Yes, the monster regime that is responsible for at least 60 million deaths, the place that had actual gulags, the place that actually dominated and with tanks and guns and armor, all those satellite nations, all those SSRs that nobody can name. This is where Bernie Sanders decided to honeymoon with his bride, who would really become later a big banking guru and now under investigation. So this guy's all about jobs, right? Because when I think of jobs, I think of the Soviet Union. When I think of jobs and productivity, I think of Soviets, right? Yes, indeed. And how about our number one reason to question Bernie Sanders' fitness for any kind of a piece of job legislation? He owns 3 homes and has millions and millions of dollars in assets. How does that jibe? Well, I guess it jibes perfectly. If you actually understand socialism,
that's exactly how it would operate.
This jibes perfectly, right? Lectures everybody else about having to do more with less, lectures everybody else about universal incomes and all of this business and the evil 1% and those evil banks that he hates, not so much his wife, but he hates them. And so the owner of 3 homes, including a really nice, fancy, smancy one they just bought after his wife's problems, three homes, millions of dollars in assets. Love to see you lead first, Bernie. Sell one of those homes and dedicate the money to a jobs program somewhere, and we will take you seriously. Well, there's always the college kids. They'll vote for you no matter what.
Speaking of college kids, finally, Penn State is shutting down the 98-year-old outing club after administrators deem this group to be too risky for the student body.
Now, hang on. Outing. Is this where they find straight people and out them? Is that what this is?
I thought at first it would be, but it's not.
It's not the out.
They're ousting the outing club.
They're ousting the outing club. What is the outing club?
The outing club, and this is even according to their own mission, they are a group that stimulates an appreciation of outdoor activities and an awareness of the need for conservation of our natural environment, teaches the skills needed for the safe enjoyment of these activities, develops leadership and understanding for group responsibility among its members. Basically, it's a group of people who go out into the woods away from technology and enjoy the nature around them.
Yeah, so it's a group that spends a lot of time outdoors and trying to be conservatory, right? They want to conserve nature. So there's an ecological bent to this. People being outdoors, enjoying nature, being ecologically responsible. How in the world could the progressives at Penn State shut that down? What was their argument?
Well, the spokeswoman said that the university conducted a proactive risk assessment. So they paid how much money for this to happen. And they said that this wasn't based on anyone, maybe going out in the woods and getting hurt or injured. It was nothing to do with that. But that basically the activities were high risk because they take place in remote environments with poor cell phone service and sometimes far from emergency services.
Is the university actually arguing that we cell phoneize all of the natural wilderness of this country?
I think they are.
Well, in other words, we won't let Penn State students be part of an official club if they have to go to places where there's no cell phone reception, right? Nanny state, you almost wonder if Bernie Sanders' wife is somewhere behind all of this, making money off this ridiculousness. So this 98-year-old club now has been banned, kicked out, not supported by the university, Penn State, primarily because it may take kids so far into the wilderness that they are away from their cell phones and they have no signal.
And the thing is, it's not just them. So they also, because they did this risk assessment on all the organizations and the caving club. So if you want to go spelunking, you can't be at least part of the caving club anymore. And the Nittany Scuba Club, that's also too dangerous.
So in any way you could possibly engage with nature is banned. Absolutely. If you go underwater, you go in caves, or you go into the woods, now you're banned at Penn State. They will not recognize you as a club.
Yeah, and I don't understand where the leftists are, how they're not in outrage that you can no longer go outside and hug a tree. Like, how are they not crying?
This is where the progressive dream meets the regulatory state. That's your modern university. For all their Marxist talk, they're the biggest money grubbers around. They want more and more and more. They keep raising tuition. They keep raising everything and producing a lower quality product. And now here they are then with all that regulation, using it to shut down something like the outdoor club, which seems like a pretty good idea to me. How about our list of 5 other things that Penn State University, if we're going to play this game, 5 other things Penn State University should go ahead and ban because they're dangerous. Give us number 5.
Yeah, the number 5 one is whiteout at football games.
Yeah, one of the Penn State colors are blue and white, and they've got this big 100,000 seat stadium. So when the Ohio State Buckeyes or other high prominent teams come to play in Happy Valley, all the students wear white and they white out the opponent. How is that not a macro aggression? How is that not white privilege? How is that not racist and racial and utterly unacceptable? Not on my standards, but on the goofy standards that determines who gets to speak on college campuses. Aren't whiteouts part of the problem?
They are.
Blackify whiteouts.
That's what we need to do.
Number 4.
Sensitivity warriors should also ban PSU Speaker Bureau.
Absolutely. Look at who Penn State has had for their commencement speakers. Look at the kind of people Penn State has invited to the campus to speak. Many of them Black Lives Matter advocates, for instance, who have not disavowed violence, who have not disavowed the violence in their own movements. You have speakers on that campus that are promoting all sorts of things that are potentially harmful to listen to. Just ban all, in the name of our kids' safety, just ban all the Speakers Bureau at Penn State. Get rid of it.
All right, and since we're in Pennsylvania, number 3, you better get rid of the campus Starbucks.
There is a Starbucks?
There is a Starbucks on the campus.
Are you telling me there is a Starbucks on the College of Penn State campus?
I cannot believe it.
You are telling me that. How many black people have they had arrested for going to the bathroom?
That's a good question.
This is unacceptable. Absolutely. Whiteouts and a Starbucks. Number 2, we got to ban all libraries.
Get rid of them.
How many books written by dead white men are there in the Penn State libraries?
Just take a torch to it.
I mean, it'd be huge, wouldn't it?
Too many.
I mean, there got to be shelves and shelves and shelves and shelves and shelves of books like The Lord of the Rings and the Bible.
How dare
right? Books about John Adams, right? GQ would not approve. Ban it. Get rid of the library. And the number one thing Penn State University should get rid of to protect its students is the showers in the football locker rooms, right? Very dangerous place to be a little boy for a number of years. Get rid of those too. If we're going to play this weird game where all we care about is the nanny state, make them shower at home. Send them home sweaty, make them shower at home.
Well, better give them some extra shampoo to take along home with them.
Shampoo. I'm not going there.
All right. So we do have a question this week.
A question from a viewer.
We did. We got one from Alex in Texas, and he wants to know, hi, Dr. Duke. I saw that California actually has a bill in their assembly that was basically going to outlaw anything that could be perceived as hate speech. And they were interviewing someone who said that as it's written, this bill, it would make it legal to actually ban Bible sales. Is this true? What are your thoughts on this? I'm enjoying your show so much. Keep up the good work, and God bless.
Well, thank you, Alex in Texas. And, well, I've looked at the statutes, and while the statutes that California is considering do not outrightly ban any particular text, if you look at the way the clauses are written, you could certainly concede that any text that has anything that violates, even part of a text that violates particularly their laws about lesbian and gay inclusivity, could be banned. And so the question is, would they actually ban the Bible, or would they just prohibit you from reading Deuteronomy, for instance? The fact remains is that the law is written so broadly that they certainly could justify doing it, which is why the law has to be stopped, right? The law does not overtly ban the Bible, because they know they couldn't get away with it. But what it does do is it makes it very, very, very difficult for any book that falls short of their particular progressive standards when it comes to sexuality and a whole host of other things to pass muster. It's a dangerous precedent. It's pulling us closer to what Canada's doing. The Canadians are really beginning to, in some places in Canada, you can be arrested for preaching parts of the Bible that deal with sexuality that they don't like. California would love to do that, and they're priming the pump for this now.
All right, Alex, I hope that answers your question. If you have a question for Dr. Duke or for me, send an email to askduke@fpeusa.org.
I'm very happy to welcome Tim Schmidt to the show. Tim is the founder and president of the United States Concealed Carry Association, an organization that provides education, training, and insurance protection for responsibly armed Americans. And one of the things I love most about your organization is the focus on education. And education and guns seem to be inextricably linked in the news today. We have what's going on at Parkland, the horrible tragedy, and yet still another walkout being planned here to oppose the Second Amendment. These schools are supposed to be in the business of educating kids to think critically, right? Presenting kids with both sides of an argument, giving kids real factual information that will allow them to judge for themselves what they want to do with regards to guns or anything else. And what we see happening in this culture is really consistently organized international groups from George Soros across the board who are funding these kids, who are using these kids, ironically, almost as pawns, right, to promote an agenda they don't seem to be able to articulate very well. Nobody wants to be shot at. But if somebody's shooting, we all want to be able to protect ourselves. We know that Wyoming just passed a law that will allow teachers to arm themselves in the classroom. And when you consider the two different situations, we really have a huge divide in this country about how we're going to handle these things.
No, that's a great point. And the thing to understand is that it's a very common misconception that for a school to be properly armed, that all the teachers have to carry guns. And of course, that always goes over not very well because most teachers are afraid of guns. And I understand that. But the good news is that it only takes about 5% of a group of administrators, teachers, and coaches to be discreetly armed and to get rid of all the ridiculous signs that are put all over schools saying that they're gun-free zones for there to be traction. Because ultimately, I don't care who you are, if you're a psychopath or a criminal, these guys do not want to go to places where they know they will find armed resistance. And that's all we have to do. So just a slight little twist and getting rid of the signs. Now we instantly change our schools to being, instead of being, soft target shooting zones, now they become safe places for our kids. And just to make a quick, interesting comparison, this is not like a brand new experiment. We happen to do this already in places like jewelry stores, banks, airports, all the places that we want to protect, we put armed guards. Sometimes they're discreet, sometimes they're overt. But the bottom line is that it works, and we need to do this in our schools.
Well, Tim, think about how many people across the country have signs on their lawn or their door saying, this house is watched by security, and it's not. I mean, there's a huge thriving business in people putting signs out there because they know just alerting criminals to the fact that maybe this house is being watched drives them away. And yet we keep these ridiculous posters, these signs on all the school doors saying, hey, this is the one place you know you're never going to find a gun.
Exactly. And that's one of the neatest things about this concept of concealed carry is that it provides this natural, powerful deterrent effect. And you only have to have a small percentage of the population actually doing the concealed carry for it to work. Because guess what? When effectively discreetly carried, the bad guys don't know who has a gun. It could be the 79-year-old grandmother. It could be the 25-year-old girl. But again, it's the deterrent effect that really has caused crime levels to drop in every state that passes concealed carry. And the only places really that we have these mass shootings nowadays are in movie theaters, are in churches, are in schools. And the one common thread is they all put the signs up and make the policies that say that no guns allowed, which is, again, it's like sticking your head in the sand.
Yeah, and this is what leads us all to believe, and I think quite correctly, accurately, that the people who are pushing these kind of gun anti-Second Amendment movements, they don't want responsible gun ownership. They want guns gone. And it has nothing to do with school shootings. It has nothing to do with these kind of attacks. It has everything to do with their politics, what they think the country should be, ceding control to government. I want to throw this out at you, and I know you're going to, if you haven't heard it already, I don't think it's going to surprise you. What's going on in Illinois right now, where Illinois lawmakers are trying to pass a law that will urge, if not force, schools to replace armed security guards with therapists, psychological therapists, which is just a staggering thing.
Well, believe it or not, I actually had not heard of that. But does it surprise me? Of course not. Illinois they're well known for doing absolutely ridiculous things regarding firearms or safety or self-defense in general. Now, of course, you and I both know this will have absolutely zero effect. If anything, it'll make it worse. I'm actually speechless about this. I mean, the only concept that criminals, that psychopaths understand is force. I mean, why do we call police when there are shootings? Because they're the good guys with the guns. And so to me, it only makes crystal clear sense to have the good guys with the guns there beforehand. And that's that small percentage of the teachers, the coaches, the administrators. And a lot of these people, maybe they were in the military before, they want to defend they want to be that first line of defense. So we're not going to be relying on the social studies teacher who's petrified of guns. Hey, don't worry, you're fine. We're going to have that small group that's going to have your back.
Yeah, it is frustrating when you think about, returning to where we started, how the anti-gun movement really does see in these kids an effort to do something they couldn't do. Before we went on air, you and I talked about this, that for how many decades and decades now has the anti-gun left failed to connect with people, failed to connect with women, failed to connect with kids, many different organizations for kids, responsible shooting organizations. They haven't been able to win the argument because there's no argument there. Yet now they're turning to kids, highly impressionable kids who've gone through the very ideologically driven public school systems, to use this moral outrage to sort of shut up people who would dare to challenge their numbers, the mistaken and the wrong facts that they're giving about guns and gun ownership. And so these kids are being mobilized without really knowing what's going on. What would you say to somebody? How do you, as somebody who is so prominent in protecting the gun rights of so many people, how do you talk to either adults or the kids they're promoting, and they point to these kids and they say, hey, these kids have been on the front line. These kids have absolute moral authority. How do you frame the arguments yourself when you come across these issues?
So for me, the best way that works for me is to actually use stories of responsibly armed citizens that have saved lives, stopped crimes, and then reference the not just handful of stories like this, but the hundreds of thousands of families whose lives have been changed because of a firearm, because of the responsible, effective, and safe deployment of a firearm. I mean, stories are essentially the only way to combat the other side of the story. Now, here's something I'll throw at you, Dr. Duke, because I think that this is going to backfire on the left. I think that this whole concept of mobilizing these children who are essentially regurgitating completely false stories and narratives or more statistics, because more people than less can see through this. So you're going to find this fascinating, but I have a list of almost 2 million responsibly armed citizens that get our weekly newsletter. And when we reverse append those folks in terms of getting some more information about them, half of these 2 million people identify themselves as Democrats. They're Democrats who at the same time want to be able to be that first line of defense for their citizens. And so when they see this sort of stuff on TV, they see it for exactly what it is, which is low-handed tactics. I really think this is going to blow up in their face. That's
an amazing statistic. Over 1 million Democrat gun owners with your association. And I was going to ask you the paradox, and I think you've confirmed it, but since these attacks on the Second Amendment have gone up since the Parkland shooting, not just the members that you currently have, are you seeing a spike in membership? What is the business of this been for you since then? I know other organizations, most notably the NRA, is boasting huge numbers rise since this. The more the Second Amendment's attacked, the more people sign on. Are you finding the same thing?
We exactly are. And I just want to quickly clarify one point so there's no misconception here. But I mean, the USCCA is all about libertarian-based, pro-freedom, pro-constitution principles. So the fact that half of the folks on our email list are Democrats is really kind of a weird thing to me. I appreciate it because, look, everyone wants safety and security for their family and loved ones, no matter what side of the political party they're on. And I personally think it's great that they're willing to come over to a team of folks who believe not just, we believe it's a natural-born, God-given right to defend yourself that was simply affirmed by the Constitution. Now, back to your question. Yes. So February of this year was hands down the biggest new membership month we've ever had in the history of the USCCA, which is essentially started in 2004. So that's quite a few years. And that's a short month. So that says a lot. And the good news is that these are people that they want to learn more. They want to be educated. They want to be responsible gun owners so that when, God forbid, they're in that situation of having to defend their family and loved ones, they're going to know what to do, what to say, what not to say, and really, be that leader that they know they're supposed to be.
I think that's an amazing point you bring up, The idea that gun ownership and protecting our families and the Second Amendment, it really is one of those issues, isn't it, Tim, that crosses all party lines, that crosses all those things that so radically divide us now as a country. It is remarkable to me how people of all different walks, one of the things we saw after that horrible shooting in Orlando, the gay nightclub that was shot up, a huge spike in gay and lesbian gun ownership, right? This idea that somehow empowerment and protection and the civic virtue that comes from being able to protect yourself, that this crosses party lines. It's not a political issue. Radical elements on both sides to some degree try to make it about politics, but we know that it's much more of a unifying issue than a dividing one.
It really is. It really is a unifying issue, and no better was this felt by me than a couple weeks ago. We had our annual USCCA Concealed Carry Expo in Louisville, Kentucky, where 15,000 people showed up to this thing to essentially, again, to learn more about responsible gun ownership, to meet some of the over 160 vendors we had there and talk about a cross-section of the USA. It was unbelievable. And getting to talk to these people and shake their hands and understand their concerns, it was very gratifying and very rewarding. And so, yes, it definitely is a nonpartisan issue. Like I said before, I say this ad nauseum, but everyone wants safety and security for their family. I don't care what political party you're on, and that's what we're here for. That's what we do. We teach people to be that responsibly armed citizen.
Well, I'm really glad to talk to you about this. And one of the things we hit on again and again over the course of this interview is how important it is to give people correct information. That seems to be the issue, right? The more correct information we can put in front of families, the better.
That's my mission in life is to help people understand the truth and help them understand that the firearm is simply a tool that they can use for amazing things, for saving people's lives, for stopping crimes, and that's what it's all about.
Tim, it is always a great pleasure to speak with you and share the incredible work you're doing at the USCCA. Tell our audience before we go where they can learn more about your mission, about the United States Concealed Carry Association.
Sure. The easiest way is just to go to uscca.com. There's all sorts of free resources, videos, downloads, guides, and again, most of it's free. And it's a great way to take your first step to being that responsible gun owner, that responsibly armed citizen that I think deep in your heart you know that you want to be, and I'm here to help you.
Tim Schmidt, thank you very much for your time today. We appreciate it.
In this corner, your pugilistic pundit, the Duke of Diplomacy, the Professor of Patriotism, the Doctor of Domestic Tranquility.
This is Right Makes Might with Dr. Duke.
The internet was ablaze this week because of a tweet from Jessica Valenti, a so-called feminist author. She writes, I think, for the U.S. Guardian, and she describes herself this way on her site, quote, a woman whose rhymes with witch face never rests. So that's a good entree. Apparently she has a second grade daughter, a 7-year-old. And she showed a picture up on her Twitter account and with the caption, to the folks who find LGBTQ language confusing, if my daughter's second grade class gets it, so can you. And you see this really goofy poster alongside, and note to the right, immediately to the right of it, you see a Common Core math problem. And you can see how overwrought that Common Core math problem is. And you can see how utterly ungrade appropriate the language of this so-called second grade assignment is. That poster that details these aspects of the lesbian, bi, gay, transgender terminology, including a quote like this one, quote, queer. It's complex and can mean a lot of things. That is not the language of a 7-year-old. This woman is trying to pass off what the teacher hung at the front of the room. You can see them there hanging from the front of the classroom as the kid's own work. It's not the kid's work. It is an adult elementary school teacher who is feeding your kids propaganda and making them memorize a set of complex standards and ideas that they can't possibly understand. And Jessica Valenti, with her witch face, is actually bragging about this. Keep bragging, honey. The fact is that if you want your kids to be exposed to that, knock yourself out. You're going to have to explain to her when she gets home, that 7-year-old, what any of those words mean. And you're going to have to try to get it through her young brain in a way that critical thinking, underdeveloped critical thinking brain is going to have to try to come to grips with. If you want to burden your kid with that, then do it. But there are a lot of us out there that don't want our kids burdened with that kind of sexuality in elementary school any more than we want our kids burdened by that stupid Common Core math. I can't decide which is goofier and less relevant to how our kids learn.
Do you like lists, and more lists? Well, check out the Dr. Duke Show, free online every Thursday at 2 p.m. Central Standard Time on YouTube and Facebook Live. Then listen to it again on the podcast version on SoundCloud and iTunes. And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a 5-star review. And now, it's time for Dr. Duke's Quote of the Day.
Our quote of the day comes from the infamous Margaret Sanger, who is the creator, as we all know, of the despicable Planned Parenthood. She once wrote, and let me just let this sink in, the woman who is the face and the founder of Planned Parenthood, reaping $500 million of your taxpayer money every year, said this, quote, "The most merciful thing that a large family does to one of its infant members is to kill it. The most merciful thing a family does, a large family does, to one of its infant members is to kill it." That's exactly the kind of philosophy and ideology now that has not been checked. It has not been repudiated. Groups like Planned Parenthood have not been made to pay a price for it. And yet we see what's happening today across the pond in England with young Alfie Evans. After multiple appeals, after multiple begging on the part of mom and dad to extend his treatment, to find alternative sources of treatment, despite the fact that the Italian government has made Alfie an honorary citizen, they have an air helicopter ready to fly Alfie from London to Italy for extended treatment, the bureaucrats and the legal system of England says he must die. We had brokenhearted to see images now. They took him off life support and the baby continued to breathe. When you think about what Margaret Sanger said, and you think about what's happening in England, what happens from this abortive culture? We're rapidly ceasing to become a culture that mercifully seeks to extend life, that mercifully reaches out to try to provide and prolong and protect life wherever we find it. We have become a culture that's become a bully in death. We have become a death bully culture. Margaret Sanger said it all those years ago. The best thing that can be done in a large family is to abort one of the children. The best thing that can be done for a suffering child, regardless of who else wants to help, regardless of the mercy that other countries wish to bestow on this family, we're going to kill it anyway. We're going to let it die. It's not mercy anymore. It's the power of the state to kill. And whether you see it in abortion, in fact, the fact that we do allow it in abortion means we can extend that death cult to living babies as well. Alfie Evans, our prayers are with you. We still hope at the 11th hour that the English government will do the right thing, or at least let the Italian government do the right thing if you're not capable of doing it yourself. But let's never forget that as long as people like Margaret Sanger and the pernicious influence she's had on culture aren't rebuked by progressives, you're going to get more Alfie Evans, more death, despite the fact that there are plenty of means and plenty of opportunity and plenty of people and countries willing to preserve life. And that does it for us this week. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke, and we will see you next time.